President Buhari swears in acting Chief Justice of Nigeria.
I Wto do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Federal government calls for multi-dimensional approach to tackling drug abuse.
INEC assures international community of credible 2023 general elections.
So each time Nigeria conducts a general election, it's like a general election in the whole of West Africa.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the exit of Nigeria's Chief Justice, plus World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference on Trade Agreements.
Nigerians began the working week with the breaking news of the resignation of the head of the judicial arm of government, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Ibrahim Tanko Mohammed.
Now, the resignation has generated widespread comments by Nigerians, and of course, including members of the legal profession, as to the rationale behind the resignation.
Although Justice Tanko Mohammed cited health as the basis for his resignation, some analysts are of the opinion that the action might not be unconnected with the recent misunderstanding between the immediate past CJN and some other colleagues on the apex bench.
No question about that, Kieran. That view has been widely expressed. We recall that before his resignation, 14 justices of the Supreme Court, in an unprecedented move, had written to the CJN himself complaining about the poor conditions of work and other issues that they felt needed urgent attention. But what about the circumstances of the exit of the Chief Justice? This might be, of course, the first time serving the CJN has resigned voluntarily on account of ill health, and an acting CJN has already been appointed to steer the affairs of the judicial arm of government, and this has been done without delay. So, what is the task ahead of the new CJN against the backdrop of what had been playing out in the third arm of government? And what should he do to address particularly the grievances of the justices of the Supreme Court and other judicial officers at large? And what lessons are there to learn from the current situation? It's Good Morning Nigeria, and we're welcoming you to the program, as always, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And aside the developments in the judiciary, we shall also discuss the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference Trade Agreements, popularly called MC12, in today's edition of the program. I am Kirian Umayo. You are welcome to the program. In addition, we shall serve you, as always, complimentary segments in the course of today's package. For now, here is the morning news with Elizabeth Omari. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Kieran and Kingsley. Here is the morning news. Justice Olukayode Ariwola has been formally sworn in as Acting Chief Justice of Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari performed the ceremony following the voluntary resignation of the substantive Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Ibrahim Tanko Mohammed, on health grounds.
I Wto Reforms do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
This occasion It's an opportune time for me to, as always, assure the Nigerian judiciary that this administration is committed to ensuring the independence of the judiciary and will not do anything, nor take any steps to undermine your independence. Our nation is approaching a critical general election in 2023. The judiciary must not do anything to fail the ordinary people of Nigeria, which will make them lose confidence in the judiciary.
Away from the judiciary, Nigeria joins the rest of the United Nations in marking the 2022 International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Drugs Trafficking. The theme of this year's edition is Addressing Drug Challenges in Health and Humanitarian, with the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, spearheading the celebration. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, during the event held at the Conference Center of the Presidential Villa in Abuja, applauds the achievements of the nation so far and also calls for a multidimensional and holistic approach to tackling drug abuse in the country.
Faith-based organizations and community leadership at the local levels. We must spearhead massive value reorientation across the country, reassessing cultural factors and systems that support drug abuse and trafficking. Our communities everywhere must rise to this challenge.
Given the dearth of treatment facilities in the country, it will be impossible to make the kind of gains we are targeting. The good news is that President Muhammadu Buhari, graciously, with the support of the National Assembly, has approved the establishment of 6 rehabilitation centers across the 6 geopolitical zones for the NDLEA.
In other news, INEC has assured the international community that the 2023 general elections will set a standard for other developing countries. Chairman of INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, gave the assurance at a meeting with UN Secretary General Special Envoy to West Africa and the Sahel.
Nigeria is one out of 15 countries in the sub-region. The total number of registered voters in the other 14 countries put together is 73 million, meaning that Nigeria has 11 million more registered voters than the other countries in the sub-region put together. So each time Nigeria conducts a general election, it's like a general election in the whole of West Africa.
The Zamfara state government has cleared the air on its decision to allow individuals to legitimately acquire guns for self-defense as part of new measures to tackle the persistent security challenges bedeviling the state. The State Commissioner for Information, Ibrahim Dusara, threw more light on the new security measures during a press conference in the state's capital.
The Zamfara state government is making consultations with the federal, with the presidency and the high security commands in the country with a view to obtaining permission for the Inspector General of Police to grant license to people wishing or who qualify to possess such lawful weapons to be used in defending themselves.
Meanwhile, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabo, has reacted to a statement by the Zamfara State Governor Bello Muhammad calling on the citizens to acquire licensed arms to protect themselves, describing it as inappropriate.
I'm quite optimistic that the conduct of this joint training exercise would provide the participants and the emphasis of Nigerian personnel the prospects of enhancing cooperation and interoperability between the operational and strategic levels of military operations. The joint training exercise will enhance the capability of the participants to operate across the full spectrum of joint military operations.
And that's the morning news. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Kieran after the break. To stay with us.
All right, well, thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria. Now, time for business news. The Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, is taking the lead in the commemoration of 2022 World MSMEs Day to highlight their contributions to the economy. Let's now join Aleka Balachi Arwa for details of that and more.
As Nigeria joins the global business community to celebrate the contributions of micro, small and medium enterprises to the economy amid the COVID-19 pandemic, conflicts and climate-related issues were some of the challenges discussed. Stakeholders speak on prospects amid economic recovery and prosperity.
The agency is focusing on strengthening MSME supply chain to power self-reliant MSMEs. Consequently, policy, technology, leadership and skills needs to be upscaled to drive the entire ecosystem.
Formal SMEs contribute up to 40% of national income in emerging economies. These numbers are significantly high when informal SMEs are included.
Challenge any entrepreneur should be facing in Nigeria now. In all sincerity, apart from that, there's no light, and the other alternative means of light, which is to power either your generator with diesel or fuel, is not available. And working capital, we'll say, is also a bit challenging if you use all your working capital to actually use it to source for power.
The theme for this year's MSMEs Day is resilience and rebuilding MSMEs for sustainable development. And taking a look at Monday tradings on the floor of the exchange. With business news, Aleka Balachi Arwa.
Many thanks, Alika, for the business news package and Good Morning Nigeria. Newspaper Review is next for us.
The resignation of course, we are diving into newspaper review, and here we have Bayo Atuyabi with us. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Kevin.
Yes, I was about to pass forward. That's right.
So the issue of the resignation of the CJN. All right, Kira, let's take a look at the window page of the New Telegraph. As you would expect, I mean, all the papers have on their front pages this morning the resignation of Justice Tanko Ibrahim Muhammad as Chief Justice of the Federation. But let's begin by taking a look at the front page, as I said, of the New Telegraph, incorporating other headlines. Looming U.S. recession threatens capital inflows into Nigeria. That's one of the headlines on the front page. Insecurity, Catholic churches and others tighten security during service hours in Osun. Gulak's killers, police arrest another suspect. NUC, that's National Universities Commission, and stakeholders move to rejig varsity curriculum. Federal government enforces 10 naira per litre sugar tax on carbonated drinks. That's on page 25. Buhari swears in Ariwola as acting CJN as Tanko resigns, cites ill health. That, of course, is the lead story you can see there on the front page. Organ donor claim. Ekweremadu and wife drag Nimsi and others to court. The court fixes July 1 for hearing. Unremitted deductions, Ogun workers embark on indefinite strike. 2023, APC debunks alleged 6.5 trillion naira budget to compromise electorate and INEC. 2023, I take that again, APC debunks alleged 6.5 trillion naira budget to compromise electorate and INEC. You have details of that story inside the paper. Now, the second lead story on the front page is right there at the foot of the page. It says tension as Ansaru terrorists armed political activities in parts of Kaduna. Kieran.
All right, now let's turn to Punch newspaper. Above the name flag of the Punch, fuel subsidy refinery rehabilitation go up 1.3 trillion naira in 5 months. That's according to the NNPC. The details on page 21. Federal government rakes in over 2 trillion naira from marginal oil field sale. It's on page 22. And on page 14, we have a story on Tinubu's men rule parties without presidential candidate and others. Now, that's the kicker. Federal government probes organ donors data privacy breach. It's on page 22. All right, now below the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, we have the lead story, Supreme Court crisis, just as Kingsley also read. NBA wants ex-CJN probed. Arula sworn in. Workers demand autonomy. Now, 3 riders to that. Ex-CJN's probe necessary for justice administration, say NBA chapters. We've been vindicated. Justices are awake from slumber. That's according to Jason. Now, no allegation should be swept under the carpet, CSOs insist. All right, now below the photo story, which is of course the swearing in of the new CJN, we have other stories. 306,489 tested positive for HIV in 2021, says NACA. That's on page 15. Now, JAM to probe CBT centers over extortion, threatens fine. It's on page 15. Benue cop detained for allegedly killing driver over bribe. That story is on page 5. All right, now at the bottom of the Punch newspaper, CDS false self-defense order, Zamfara government adamant. It's on page 16. Bauchiman lures teenager to farm, plucked out eyes for ritual. It's on page 5. A lot of things are really happening. All right, now police arrest suspected killer of Jonathan's ex-aide Golak. That's on page 14. But let's bring you in here, and I'd like you to speak to one or two of these, but not necessarily the issue of CGN, because of course we're going to give that a treat, on the program this morning. This issue of testing positive for HIV, does it mean that this has reared its ugly head back again in the country?
Well, the factors that predispose persons to test positive to HIV have not been completely removed. What has happened is that there have been precaution and other measures taken which has limited the infection and its spread. If at any point in time those measures are abandoned, there is a tendency, if you go adventurous about sexual activity, there's a tendency that you are likely to come in contact with them, because HIV positive is in danger and it has not been eradicated. It is lurking there. Because of measures, it has been contained and it is having less effect. The other story that has come to the fore, apart from that of the new Chief Justice and the resignation of the former, is the issue of self-defense. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Rabo, has complained that the governor of Zamfara State does not have the powers to authorize the Commissioner of Police to issue arms to persons to bear arms. He said he doesn't have that powers. Nevertheless,
to issue licenses.
Yes, he said he doesn't have the powers. The Chief of Defense Staff is expressing serious concern about that. But the Commissioner for Information in Zamfara State, Ibrahim Losara, is emphatic and saying that in Zamfara State, their position is that crime, in spite of several measures that have been adopted, has persisted because of the efforts of the person he described as saboteurs or conflict entrepreneurs. They are dominated there, and therefore the thing has continued, and therefore they have no choice but to ask citizens to defend themselves.
Yes, it is a good issue you've thrown up, because You see, it's a situation where a community will be sleeping, and all of a sudden people will come, besiege them, attack them, kill them massively, and it has continued over the years. I mean, under normal circumstances, one would have thought, look, why would I just die like a chicken? Why wouldn't I protect myself one way or the other? The law is there, yes, I agreed from what of the military personnel said, which is very clear. But then, how do people just stay and die? Knowing that, look, I could be attacked tomorrow, I have nothing to tell myself, nothing, just stay and you come and be butchered. Kingsley,
what Kingsley would describe as a catch-22 situation. You don't have sufficient security men to be present everywhere, and criminals are having their presence and dominating everywhere and harassing and killing people. So the option now is, can you have a day gun or a gun that you have a license to face a man who has an automatic self-loading machine gun? Those are the challenges.
But the point that if the man with machine gun knows that, look, he could also be attacked, there is that fear too. They also are not prepared to die in the first place. Yes. So you have a better machine or whatever it is. I have a lower one, but if you know that I have something to defend myself, it's a different scenario. So think twice before you take action.
We discussed this briefly yesterday. Don't be super review when the story first broke here, and there are different perspectives to it, including what you just raised. But the concern of the Chief of Defence Staff is simple, because when you know, there's the literal expression, the call to arms. Which is to say, get ready, get prepared to confront a challenge or a situation that is menacing. But this is not just now in the literal sense. What the governor suggested, or the state government suggested, is that some persons in the 19 emirates of the state should apply for licenses to arm themselves, and by one calculation that will come to some 9,500 weapons in the hands of citizens in Zamfara. Now, how do you deal with that? How do you also deal with the issue of potential misuse? Look at the United States, for instance. I mean, there are constant references to the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and that Second Amendment is a problem for the United States, because it's been elaborated and interpreted to such a situation where by the time you are 18 years, and sometimes even less, and then you meet some other criteria, you have the right to possess a weapon, and it could be from a handgun to an automatic self-loading rifle, and then we see the consequences all across the U.S. So part of the running of the CDS also has to do with proper authorization for the licensing of arms. We raised it yesterday. In the past, licenses will be issued for you to possess a certain kind of weapon, but people will then obtain that license and then go on the purchase a higher caliber weapons. Now, the entire country is awash with illicit weapons. How do you deal with this?
It is a big issue, no doubt about that, but the governor, I really feel for him as the chief security officer of his state. He's burying people almost on a weekly basis in their tens or hundreds, as the case may be, for years. So the man is really bothered about what is the bloodshed, in his area of jurisdiction. I'm not speaking for him, but I think he's making a point. This is human life we're talking about, and some people are so much, free to operate, and dish out menace, in communities. This they don't sleep at night any longer.
Let's also look at the other story.
I know that you're going to another story, because we're wrapping this up now presently. Now, the state government on Sunday also announced the beef up of their community security groups.
Yes, there are about 200. They are going to increase them to about 500
per emirate.
Yes, per emirate.
So the whole idea with them, some people are already drawing an analogy with Amotekun and saying, look, there are restrictions on the kind of weapons that they could have, whether it's a Dane gun or an air rifle, and so on and so forth. If the state government is beefing up the capacity and capability of these community policing groups, that could be a first step. Try that before you have a call to arms to all the citizens in the 19 Emirates for each of them to kill it. I understand what you are saying. I mean, because self-preservation is the first rule of people.
Not everyone can afford to buy guns in the first place, even if you be licensed. Not everybody has the resources to buy that.
Don't be too sure. I'm the last all about the place.
Exactly. I think
the place.
That's the second.
There was a good news about security. You recall in the Imo State, when the former advisor to President Goodluck Jonathan was killed, the Imo Police Command said they have arrested a 38-year-old young man who confessed to be a member of the IPOB and Eastern Security Network, and they were responsible for the death of Ahmed Gulak on his way to Sam Mbakwe Airport. They also paraded some other persons who were responsible for burning 5 police stations in Imo, including the burning of the home of Professor George, the president of
kudos to the police.
Yes.
Because some persons would have thought that the Gulak case by now is becoming a cold case, a cold file case. But that's kudos to them for what they have done in picking out this guy.
Yeah, gentlemen, we are short of time right now, and I'd like to appreciate Bayo once more for being here this morning. So we'll see you again tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
you are watching Good Morning Nigeria. We take a short break now. When we return, we shall be facing the 2 major topics for conversation this morning. Stay with us.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. As always, we are live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, the resignation of Honorable Justice Ibrahim Tanko Muhammad as Chief Justice of Nigeria has continued to generate conversations among Nigerians. And joining us in the studio now to discuss this topic further, we'd like to welcome 2 learned senior advocates of Nigeria. First, Jibrin Samuel Okutapa. So I'd like to have you on the program this morning.
Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning, sir.
All right.
Yes, we also have Mazde Afamosigwe, SAN, former NBA General Secretary. We're glad to have you this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and also joining the conversation from our Kaduna studio is Femi Okero, NTA Judiciary correspondent and also a lawyer. It's a pleasure to have you, gentlemen. I'm the only non-lawyer here, and I have to tread with caution. I have to be very careful with this set of people, especially my professional colleague who is also a lawyer. So it's law versus political science.
You are protected. All right, gentlemen, once again, it's our pleasure to have you join us. Let's just, if you may, get still a reportorial background to what is playing out. And we're going to Femi Okewo, who's been NTA's judicial correspondent for many years. Of course, he's walked the halls and the hallways of the Supreme Court and indeed other courts in the land. Femi, tell us what happened yesterday with the resignation of the Chief Justice. Many are saying, once again, unprecedented. How do you contextualize all of that?
I think it's a lot of people have said it, but I find it sad that we have to applaud something that should be part of our governance process. But a lot of people have said it, and I'm going to join in the chorus of giving kudos, applauding the former Chief Justice of Nigeria's position and decision to resign. I say it's supposed to be a normal part of our governance process because it is not out of place for anyone who thinks that any situation is affecting his optimal performance in office to leave that office. Resigning from offices is not anything strange in other climes, particularly in more advanced climes. But in Nigeria, the truth is that this is the first time I am seeing this at the third arm of government. And I am impressed too, like most people are. But I think that we should, our level in Nigeria should go beyond appraising things like this, which should be a normal thing if somebody thinks that he's not performing optimally. I have known, and most Nigerians have known, and particularly people who are close to the apex court, that Honorable Justice Tanko Ibrahim Muhammad was battling with a few health matters. I certainly could not have known that it was affecting his performance as a judicial officer. And one of the things that judicial officers need most is their mental ability to perform. That's why the law allows them to retire as age 70. Because just like professors in the universities, we need the intellectual capacity of judicial officers. And so the country needs them to be on their seat for as long as they can, continue to give that intellectual contribution to Nigeria's judicial development. So when Justice Tanko Ibrahim Muhammad decided to leave the scene, even as the number one judicial officer in Nigeria, it came to me as a surprise, but I was very, very impressed. All
right, Femi Okero, I was going to stay with you, but I also like to get your professional colleagues and institute to also make their first contribution. So I understand where you're coming from, because resignation is not in the lexicon of Nigerian public, servants over the years. People will have, even when he's sick, the person wants to die in office and all of that, and some persons will say, look, if it is a fight, let us slug it out and things like that. There are a number of issues, surrounding his resignation. Yes, one is health aspect. There are also insinuations, that because of some complaints by 14 out of 16 justices in that apex court, wrote a petition or to the former CJN complaining of several things lacking in that apex court. Now, let me bring in I guess Yamaze from Osigo to make comment on this resignation, general overview of the resignation of the former CJN.
Well, my first thought was that the resignation is linked to the letter by the 14 justices. Now, if you x-ray that letter by the 14 other justices of the Supreme Court, you get the impression of a Chief Justice of Nigeria who had lost control of the court, who could not quite keep in touch with the day-to-day relationship between him and the justices and among the justices, and who had no oversight of goings on in the court. So if you put that in context, then it would appear that the letter was a public vote of no confidence by his brother justices, and the resignation would appear to confirm that the content of the letter about his losing control, probably maybe on ground of this ill health, which was the reason for the resignation, was right. And it brings to the fore the question, what kind of persons do we appoint to public office? I seem to share a minority view among so many lawyers that the leadership in the judiciary should not be based on an Olubado kind of system where the most senior chief succeeds the Olubado when he transits. Now, I am of the view that, like obtains in the US, a governor or a president should be able to nominate a person who will be able to drive the judicial policies and other administration of justice policies of the government as a head of court. But in Nigeria, that says an unpopular view. People seem to think that if you have laid board, you should take it in terms of seniority. And so sometimes it doesn't really matter whether at the time you get to become the most senior judge in the court, your health can no longer support the further additional administrative duties put on you by law. For example, the Chief Justice of Nigeria is the head of the National Judicial Council, the head of the Federal Judicial Service Commission, the head of NTA, among so many other bodies he's head of the Legal Practitioner Privileges Committee. And then the person is also expected to sometimes sit as a justice of the court with other justices to render decisions in matters. And so, while it's commendable that he resigned to save the institution from the public odium which he seemed to be dragged into in the last few days, I also think that we need to sit back and ask ourselves critical questions about how did we get here? How did we get to a situation where justice of the Supreme Court would be given Tokumbo vehicles? Let's not call it that beautiful name of refurbished vehicles. The complaints that they were giving Tokumbo vehicles and substandard vehicles, and we know that our budgeting process does not make provision for Tokumbo vehicles for public officers holding such offices. But I'm also on one hand glad that he did the honorable thing, because he could have also said, I will not leave here unless you drag me out, or you deploy some other means to get me out, because he thereby put the interest of the institution which he heads, the legal profession, at the center of his decision-making process, and saved it by having this quiet exit. And it came in the course of the weekend, so we started a new week with the news of His Lordship's resignation. And I also hope that Honorable Justice Olukayode Arewola, who was sworn in as acting Chief Justice of Nigeria, who will most likely become the next Chief Justice of Nigeria, having been one of those who is reported to have penned that petition, which is in public domain, would now be in a better position to address them, having been one of those who identified them as the issues in court, because they impinge on the administration of justice, they impinge on the ability of the people to get justice, and he had unwittingly given a poor perception of the judiciary. And at a time where the perception of the judiciary continues to slide towards the negative, I saw the ICPC perception index, which ranked the judiciary poorly, even though I always insist that some of the figures bandied about there were more speculative than real. But the point there is that if the judiciary was being seen as performing optimally or had a stellar reputation, such a perception would not be published. But it is published, yes.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Advocate Mazi Afamusigwe. Let's bring in another Senior Advocate, Jibrin Okutepa. In a sense, the resignation of the Chief Justice of the Federation, who is the head of the third arm of government, can be likened to a palace coup against the backdrop of occurrences antecedent to his resignation. How did we get here?
Well, I do not want to say that it's a palace coup, but I want to describe it as the right thing to be done. In most cases, the problem we have in Nigeria are that truth had escaped our lexicon and falsehood had been elevated to the gods that we worship. And so in most cases, most people who work with their heads hardly challenge the heads. We have unwittingly elevated ourselves to the status of king does no wrong. So much so that even when some judicial officers who have the privilege of leading others are misbehaving in terms of how they carry themselves around, in terms of the resources available to them, how it's not going around, in terms of how they neglected their own colleagues, most of these judges are just walking in pains and they can't talk. So within this context, therefore, I will salute the 14 justices of the Supreme Court who, when pushed to the inelasticity of patience, they no longer could bear it. And given the fact that majority of Nigerians began to perceive that the Supreme Court of Nigeria, nothing good comes from there. And this was also having a telling effect on
their performances as justices of that court, judgments coming from that court began to dwindle in terms of jurisprudential soundness, in terms of the philosophical approach that judgment should get, in terms of the judgment of the court being a clairvoyant judgment that solve and sees tomorrow and solve tomorrow's problem. The judgment began to create some kind of problems for us in this country, and you are aware of some of those judgments. We may not call them here. And so these justices no longer have the capacity to research because they were hungry. Their welfare, by the memo done to his lordship, were totally neglected. Like my learned brother Mighty said, let's call a spade a spade. The vehicles that some of these justices of the Supreme Court are driving are not reasonable fit for commercial purposes. Not to talk about giving our judicial officer, those who have gotten to the apex of their career in the Supreme Court, that rickety vehicle, that rickety cars, and mark you, they don't go with a convoy to protect them. And these are people that finally decides, and whatever they say remain final. They are final not because they are infallible, or is that what my Lord Oputa said? But because the court had made them, the constitution had made them final. They are like the gods of justice in Nigeria. So I see the letter from the 14 justices of the Supreme Court to his lordship, the then Chief Justice of Nigeria, as opening Nigerians' eyes to the rot in the judiciary. We are just seeing the one in the Supreme Court. It's a tip of the iceberg. When that letter came out, I wrote that something must be done about it. And I got messages from judges across Nigeria. One of the letters I got from one of his lordships in Nigeria is that some of the chief judges across the countries are like judicial tigers. He described them as judicial tyrants who collude with their chief registrars to deprive their lordships of the lower courts of their benefits and calling unmerited favor from these judicial officers. So you begin to see that instead of these judges having undiluted, unpolluted arrangements, environment to deliver justice in judgments, in most cases what you see are judgment devoid of justice. And when you see judgment devoid of justice, you begin to see people rioting. For instance, in political matters, you are all aware, even the deaf, the blind, know that in Nigeria, democracy is not a function of the sovereignty of the people. But you know that those who didn't win election have had the electoral victory judicially stamped. And Nigerians began to ask questions because when reasonable men and women on the street know that justice has been murdered in the judgment as delivered, then the confidence in the judicial process becomes eroded. And that is why in Nigeria today, many investors hardly come here because a case filed today may outlive you and I. And I know as at the last, I was in the Supreme Court. Their lordships were giving this 2024 for cases. Some may have the misfortune, the matter will go to 2025. Why? Because the Nigerian Supreme Court, for instance, by constitutional operation, supposed to have 21 justices of that court. At the time, my Lord Honorable Justice I.T. Mohammed, CJN as he then was, resigned his appointment. There were just 15. Now, as of today, there are 14. So that takes me to a point, and I will appeal to the acting Chief Justice of Nigeria. There is now names that people should be moved to the Supreme Court. In making that appointment, and I agree with Mazi, if you are being penciled down to go to the Supreme Court as a justice of court of appeal, and you know that your health is failing you, please, in the interest of justice and Nigeria, decline. Don't force yourself to go and sit, because the job of a judge is both mental, physical, and you need to be mentally sound to be able to see and read, write, and give us sound quality judgments. That is lacking in our jurisprudence.
Thank you so much, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. It's indeed interesting that this is coming from a lawyers and the senior ones for that matter. I pick on two things you mentioned. Undiluted environment for a judge to make judgment, and judgment devoid of justice. That struck me, right? And we heard that this complaint by 14 justices is about the first of its kind in 60 years, right? And in a statement attributed to the Nigerian Bar Association President Olumide Bata, he alluded to the fact that public confidence in the judiciary and indeed legal profession is at all-time low, and you have just highlighted some of the reasons why that is so. So let me bring in Femi Okewo once more. Femi, you have covered a number of court cases over time for several years, for the NTA, and we've had direct experiences, covering specific cases at the Apex Court. How would you look at this issue of lack of confidence, public confidence on judiciary?
Now, I have been each time a new Chief Justice of Nigeria comes into office, one of the first things that you hear such a person say is about the reform of the justice system. And the summation of what we are already discussing again now today and everywhere around Nigeria is about the need for reforms in the judicial system of Nigeria. One thing I have seen, the first time Justice Dahiru Mustafa spoke, he talked about reforms. Justice Aloma Mariam Mukhtar, in fact, made a lot of impact because she was the one that introduced assessment of judges and their performances and quarterly assessment, and that met with some resistance because some people thought that it was a way of influencing their judgments. And then Justice Mahmood too came. He talked about his own reform. Justice Onoge came and mentioned reform. One thing, however, is that these reforms are very slow at showing on the face of the judicial functions across the country. They talk about reforms, but we do not see how it really impacts on the judgment that we get in the courts. In terms of confidence of Nigerians, I remember again, I want to quote Justice Aloma Mariam Mukhtar. She said the judiciary has no army or police to enforce its orders. What it has, what it depends on for an enforcement of its orders is the confidence of Nigerians in those orders, in those court judgments. Now, if Nigerians don't have confidence in people, if Nigerians on the street, like one of our guests have just said, consider a governor, a Supreme Court governor, now it tells a lot about the confidence which Nigerians have. And that is the way judges can make themselves respected, highly respected, if, at least on the face of it, if justice is seen to be done. I expect that judges are not supposed to be apologetic about their judgments if they have gone through the thorough process of finding out or doing research or taking the law in cognizance and using the law as it should be, not using it to please some other individuals. Now, judges are not supposed to be apologetic about it, but if Nigerians on the face of their judgment know that this is not justice, because judgments are meant to achieve justice. If the ordinary man on the street knows that or feels that this is not justice, then the judicial system needs to look inwards and dig back as to how it can get the Nigerian people, the people for whom they sit, get more confidence in their judgments.
Femi Okero, thank you very much. Let's return to Mazi Afamosigwe. I mean, we can elaborate on the number of the issues and what is required to be done. But it appears that this is an aperture, as it were, to other challenges with the third arm of government throughout the country, as Koto Paise earlier mentioned, in terms of the reactions that they are getting. How might we therefore get the judiciary to self-recreate, to cleanse itself and reposition itself for purposes of justice delivery? Because there is no pretense about it. We have issues with our judiciary, and this sometimes has to do with competent leadership of the judiciary at all levels.
The judiciary is becoming insular. The judiciary is becoming deaf and dumb. In fact, the publicly criticize judicial officer, or they will threaten you with stunted growth in the legal profession if you're a lawyer. For example, the process of appointing senior advocates is highly judicialized. So you see lawyers being afraid of speaking out. Law professors are no longer keen to criticize judgments of court, and most times these judgments confound you. You cite a case from a particular court, say Court of Appeal or in the same year, and one that holds a different position is cited for you from the same year. So sometimes it becomes difficult to even advise your clients as to what is the position of the law, because some of their judgments have rendered the position of the law very uncertain and fluid, and then issues arise in another case. Both parties cite different cases, and the court take a particular position without clarifying or distinguishing why any of those previous positions are not right, or which one is right and the other. And then we have this funny situation in Nigeria of saying where there are two conflicting decisions of the same court, the later in time, and it doesn't matter whether the later in time is poorly reasoned, because it is most recent, a lower court is bound to apply it. If our courts must change, the mode of appointing judicial officers. If you are the daughter or son of a politician, or you're well connected, you're more likely to be appointed a judge than that other person who is better qualified. You want to call a spade a spade? Absolutely. We should call it. The NJC called for nomination. And the constitutional provision is that if you're 15 years and above, I think, you can be appointed a justice of the Supreme Court. Over the weekend, the NBA released a list that people should comment. And none of the persons, erudite professors of law, senior advocates of law, very senior lawyers, was deemed fit to make the short list. I think we are going to change. We're not going to change. We have judicial inbreeding. So once you're a senior judge, your state of health, whether physical or mental, is immaterial. You're next in line. If the Rubadon is dead, the next must be the king. Even if that next chief is crawling, is being carried, can no longer comprehend what's going on, you must get there, because it is your turn. Like the lexicon now in politics, it is my turn. And the system dies. And like Honorable Justice Ejembieko said, the judiciary must open up his book for people to see. We've been crying about judicial autonomy funding, but becoming an opportunity for judicial corruption. You'll be shocked to note that in many states, one of the requirements for a state to get judges, means that you must show you have accommodation for them vehicles. Inspectors from NJC are taking for inspection, they see these vehicles, they see these homes. You swear in these judges that there are no homes for them. How are we able to pull off such a scam? You appoint a judge and there is no accommodation. And judges see and fear their chief judge as if he is a little Napoleon, because he's able to politicize the system to ensure that if you have a benefit meant for you, you are deprived because you're seen to be criticizing the judge. So we are building strong men, not institutions. So you see a judge being afraid of his head of court as if he's his head boy and he's a junior student who just got into the school.
Let me just pause you there. You are stating the facts, no doubt about that, from all indications, as an insider. San Okutabo, we've been hearing about reforms, and Femi Okero mentioned almost about 6 or 7 chief justices, that he has met in the course of his career at the Apex Court, who talked about reforms. Does it mean that these reforms were never effected, or that the former CJNs just, say that at the beginning of assumption of office and all of that, and again everything dies down? Meanwhile, presently, we have a special advisor to the president on judicial reforms. What has happened over the years?
I am not too sure, if we must call a spade, that we are prepared for reforms in Nigeria, both in our character, both in our willpower. In terms of what we need to do to have sound judicial system, we are not prepared. If we are prepared, I will first of all say that even those who have found themselves to be on the bench need to be re-examined, and those who are not reasonably fit to deliver justice in judgments should be shown the way out. That's number one reform I expect anybody to do. Self-evaluation. Look at yourself. As a lawyer, as a legal practitioner, as a senior advocate of Nigeria, am I reasonably fit to continue to practice law? Am I misleading the court, or am I guiding the court? You ask yourself that question. Number two, there is an arm of judiciary called the National Judicial Council. That institution is always backing without biting. In the legal profession that I love, that I join, there is this thing that is called that there must not be appearance of impropriety. Today, not only are there improprieties staring us in our face, we defend impropriety with the last blood in our vein. So much so that a judge who have a criminal allegation dangling on his head is sitting. How can you, for instance, want to reform the kingdom of heaven, and then the appointees within that heaven kingdom are agents of Satan? How do you get that thing done? So my suggestion, therefore, is that my learned brother has said so. Our appointment to the bench is 40 across the strata. Who you know matters more than what you know. Where you come from and the religions you practice matter more than your competence and your integrity and your comportment and your mien to be a judicial officer. To be a judicial officer is not a tea party. You must have certain characteristics. Number one, you must run away from the king's meat. Number two, you must not be a socialite that goes everywhere and be seen everywhere. That was why in the beginning, judges were quartered in GRA, and you don't go visiting judges. But today, politicians, with respect, have the numbers of our judicial officers. A judicial officer ought not to have a foreknowledge of the facts of the case. He ought not to have discussed the case with me and Martin in the night and come to sit and then you appear. No, he must be allowed unfettered, undiluted environment, the hygiene that is conducive for undiluted and unpolluted justice to be delivered. But today, that's not so. Therefore, if we are talking about reform, we must therefore reform ourselves, our character, our inward character. What business do we have that unless you are well connected, either as a politician's son or daughter, or it has become appointment to various offices in Nigeria has become hereditary. It has become hereditary, including, so we need also to reform the legal profession, because the legal profession, the lawyers in Nigeria today, you see a lawyer who is not reasonably fit to practice law, assumed a position of a demigod. We need to go to the legal practitioner disciplinary committee of the body of benchers and appoint seasoned Nigerian lawyers who have no skeleton in their cupboard to deal with people who have polluted the stream of justice. The Nigerian stream of justice has been so polluted that it will require the intervention of a man or woman of impeccable purity of heart and character to lead the Nigerian judiciary. That is why I think that my Lord, the Honorable Justice Olukayode Ariwola, has a very challenging and very doubting task ahead of him.
All right, Senior Advocate Okutapa, thank you very much for your views. Kiri, I was just going to point out, I mean, considering what we are hearing, it looks like what Nigeria has been experiencing in the last couple of decades is a power play. You find state governors are emperors in their states.
Of course.
Vice chancellors are emperors in their states.
Of course.
And it's also been alleged now that the honorable chief judges, some of the honorable chief judges are also emperors in their courts. That judges are scared of them, like a fag. That's from one student being scared of the head boy. I was just one aspect of this, because critical to the functions of administering the courts, besides just being brilliant, besides being healthy as a judge, as you step up, is it part of the curriculum at the NJI, that is the National Judicial Institute, to teach management or governance? Is it part of it? Because I mean, if you had management skills, you wouldn't run down your enterprise. I mean, we do know what big corporations are like. I mean, you appoint a board chairman, and you can see what the numbers will be like on the stock market. Are management skills taught and also practiced at the NJI, so that some of these issues that we are hearing about could be, taken care of? Mazi, I was just wondering.
I must confess I do not know the curriculum of the NJI. But I've always had reservations about the NJI. I've always been worried about a kind of judicial training institute that gathers judges from all over Nigeria, put them in a theater-style auditorium, and pretend to be teaching them. And all you need is to sign in for the course. Whether you're sitting down there listening, nobody knows. And while judges all over come for it, judicial activities in states are disrupted. And I've always wondered why we can't have such trainings going on in the state. Why you can't have online modules for these judicial trainings. Why the judges take these courses online when they are not sitting and write an exam at the end of it. There will be time and the result will come out within a few hours of writing the same. And I don't know.
We are running short of time. As a matter of fact, how can you start teaching the learned man?
There's no end to learning. I raised the issue of management, because management or governance, these are very vast subject areas. Management. How do you manage human beings? How do you manage an enterprise?
Have code of conduct.
No. Code of conduct is how you behave.
All right,
skills.
Gentlemen, Samuel Okutapa San, legal practitioner, thank you so much.
Thank you
for coming this morning. And Mazde Famosiwe, also SAM, former NBA General Secretary, thank you so much. And of course, our own Femi Okero, NTA Judiciary Correspondent and a lawyer. Femi, we appreciate you reaching us all the way from Kaduna. Thank you. All right, and
you didn't also thank me.
In fact, I'm happy that the lawyers have said it all. You are part of the problem of Nigeria. People are challenging in this country. All right,
and politicians too.
That one is a worst case scenario.
Politicians are the problem of Nigeria.
All right, we are going to conclude this particular segment of the program. Thank you for staying with us. This is Good Morning Nigeria on NTA Network Service. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we shall be focusing on the second leg of our conversation, which is on a WTO conference. Now, the Ministerial Conference, which is the top decision-making body of the World Trade Organization, is usually held every 2 years. However, the 12th Ministerial Conference took place about 5 years after the last conference due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Joseph Osen has more on the decisions and agreements reached at the MC12.
Between 12th to 17th of June 2022, trade ministers across the world converge on Geneva, Switzerland, for the World Trade Organization WTO 12th Ministerial Conference, tagged MC12. This top decision-making body usually meets every 2 years to review functioning of multilateral trading system, make general statements, and take action on future of the WTO. Kazantime was originally scheduled to host MC12 in June 2020, but the conference was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With headways made in dealing with the pandemic, the ministerial conference had its way. Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Mariam Kadagum, led the Nigeria's delegation to MC12. After a series of engagements, a total of 10 ministerial decisions and declarations were adopted, while 3 were considered by the General Council, GC, and brought forward to MC for adoption by the ministers. The issues had to do with WTO response to the pandemic and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights waiver, food crisis, fisheries subsidy, agriculture, health, and WTO reforms. On fisheries subsidy agreements, the 20-years-old outstanding agreement was agreed upon that no member shall grant or maintain any subsidy to a vessel or operator engaging in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing or fishing-related activities. The conference also addressed emerging response to food insecurity, where it identified trade along with domestic production as vital in improving global food security in all its dimensions and enhancing nutrition. It expressed commitment to take concrete steps to facilitate trade and improve global market for food and agriculture. Other key decisions include declaration on WTO response to the COVID-19 pandemic and preparedness for future pandemics, ministerial decision on work program on electronic commerce, declaration on sanitation and work program for small economics. Indeed, key decisions and declarations have been adopted at the WTO 12th Ministerial Conference, but how all these will be of benefit to Nigeria is what many Nigerians are concerned about. Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be giving insights on agreements adopted at the Ministerial Conference.
Many thanks, Joseph Olsen, for that elaborate background. Indeed, we have guests with us here in the studios, and they're all participants at the just concluded MC12. It's our pleasure to welcome the Honorable Minister of State, Head of Industry, Trade and Investment, Ambassador Mariam Kadagum. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, and then we also have with us in the studio the Director General of the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations and also Nigeria's Chief Trade Negotiator, Ambassador Yonu Fred Aga. Ambassador Aga, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. Good morning, and good morning, Nigeria.
And we're joining us on this conversation via Zoom from Geneva is Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to WTO. It's a pleasure to have you, Ambassador. All right.
It looks like it's maybe his audio is muted. I believe maybe our engineers will instruct him.
Exactly.
Yes, to unmute himself.
We'd have loved to start with him.
Well, yes, but let's give the engineers the opportunity of clearing that up. So
okay. Well, but yes, exactly. Honorable Minister, it's a pleasure once again to have you this morning. And let's begin with you. Give us the highlights, of this MC12 conference of WTO. Of course, we've heard about the 10 points, which our reporter raised concerning what has been reached, at this very crucial conference. Lead us into that much more.
Yes, thank you very much. I think before I give you the highlights, first of all, let me thank Mr. President for giving me approval to lead this delegation, and the importance of this meeting, MC12, coming at this time when we have as Director General Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the first female, first African, first Nigerian to hold that position, and given her antecedents in terms of her campaign promises to bring about reforms of the WTO. I think that is very important in terms of context. And secondly, the level of preparation that as a country we undertook, because when we were going prior to our departure, we had already triggered the enlarged national focal point, which is a body made up of several agencies that are involved in trade. And we had Nigeria's position prepared, even though on the ground when we got there we tried to negotiate. So that preparation helped us a lot in terms of our leadership role that we played and in terms of the outcomes. So as you said, there were 10 key outcomes, but I think for Nigeria I will select 6 that I think are of real priority. First of all, I look at the TRIPS waiver. And this TRIPS waiver has to do with waiving the rights of patents. So a country could decide very quickly that we want to start the production of vaccines. And you do not have to wait and get consent from the patent owner. You can quickly trigger the system, but you are obliged to report that, okay, we're going to use this aspect of the patent in order to produce vaccines. And this will help a lot of the developing countries, given the context of the onset of COVID-19 and what we saw happening with the vaccines. Secondly, I will take the issue of food security, because we discovered that a lot of the lack of free flow of products has created a kind of global, global situation whereby products are stuck in international markets, and then you have issues in countries either as a result of crisis, climate change, and so on. And with food security, there was a decision on enhancing the work of the World Food Programme, allowing them to export food, unrestricted exportation, particularly to areas where there is hunger. You can see they've done a lot of work in the Horn of Africa, even here in Nigeria. Then you can look at e-commerce, the moratorium that says that we should not impose customs duties on e-transmissions until perhaps the next session when we look at this decision. And for us, this is very important. We have a very vibrant digital economy. We have a lot of young people with their startups and e-commerce, so it's going to be of great benefit to us. And I think this, the next one will be the fishery subsidies. A lot of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is happening off the coast of our countries. And this really has to stop. We have to put a check on this. And I think it's an area that will help our own artisanal fishermen, because for Nigeria, a lot of the fishing that we're doing, it's with the artisanal fishermen. And the last thing that I would take will be the WTO reforms. The DG came from a background of reforms, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And we saw during the negotiations, one, she's already started reforms of the Secretariat. And then the modus operandi, because the WTO is a body that takes decisions by consensus. And we saw how we were stuck in the trenches, in the sense that a country could decide of particular interest in one of the negotiations over a word in a footnote, not even the main article. We were stuck for hours. And in fact, the meeting, as you know, was scheduled to start from 12th to 15th. The meeting did not end until the 17th, 5:30 a.m. on the 17th, trying to get all countries on board. So it's not like what you have in the UN system, whereby when you get stuck, you can go to a vote. With WTO, you have to negotiate. Every country has to agree. So how do you get this about? Trust, building trust. And we saw countries that hitherto did not have too much trust in each other, beginning to work together, agree on texts. And the mood at MC12 was that everybody wanted reform. Everybody wanted to leave Geneva with some concrete takeaway back to their countries. So I'll just take these 6, but the others are also very relevant, but I just took the 6 that I thought I can put a tag on in Nigeria. And then, of course, for us, yesterday, during our meeting, I'd given instructions that in the next 2 weeks, that a large national focal point must meet and cascade and discuss how Nigeria is going to implement the decisions of the MC12.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of State Miti. That's Industry, Trade and Investment. We'll come back to it in the course of the conversation. Now let's bring in Nigeria's Chief Trade Negotiator. We have a broad spectrum audience for the Nigerian Television Authority, Africa's largest television network. How do you explain this to the Nigerian viewing audience right now? What this WTO trade talks mean, and then why we should pay attention to the resolutions?
Well, thank you. I think 2 things that we need to have at the back of our mind. Trade remains an important tool of development. There is no country in the world that has developed without trade. So an organization like the WTO that provides the framework of rules and agreements under which countries trade should be important to Nigeria and Nigerians. The challenge for us is understanding what these rules are, creating policies that dovetail into these rules, taking advantage of the flexibilities, because inherent in every WTO agreement is a commitment to do something. At the same time, that same agreement recognizes that you are not all members are not at the same level of development. So there are flexibilities for developing countries and less developed countries. There are also flexibilities as to when you run into trouble. So I can give you an example of the balance of payments. If you have a balance of payments problem, there's a provision that allows you to impose restrictions to correct that balance of payments. In the current environment, there are high trade and geopolitical tensions. Countries are almost at each other's throat. And that is the environment under which MC12 took place. The good lesson is that MC12 was not like Seattle, where everybody was rioting, no decision, no meetings. It was not like Cancun, where developing countries were blaming developed countries were blaming the developing countries. Here, members came together and agreed. What I would want Nigerians to know is that some of the very substantive issues which have been on the WTO agenda, particularly the reform of trade in agriculture, have not been addressed, particularly with respect to domestic support. Some of these countries are still holding. And what happened at MC12 is more like an agreement. Let's see what we can agree, and then we'll take up the other issues down the road. So the challenge again is the fact that every solution in the system becomes like a problem for the future. So when you say, for instance, in fishery subsidies, the issues of overcapacity, overfishing, which have been delayed till the next ministerial, would the members actually work? Would those who are unable to come together? So I think Nigerians need to know this. Nigerians need to begin to introduce trade and WTO issues in our universities, in our schools. We need even the youth to know. Business groups need to be involved. Think tanks need to spring up, because government officials alone cannot do this. Trade is not for government. Trade is for the private sector. And the private sector engagement with the government will improve the environment on how Nigeria benefits from its participation in the WTO and grows its economy out of poverty.
Okay, thank you. I hope we have clear audio now with Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to the WTO. Once again, let's welcome you formally to the program.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, good. I take it that you listened to the Honorable Minister of State and, of course, Ambassador Aga,
yes,
explaining what transpired, during the MC12. But I'm so concerned about Africa and in particular Nigeria with respect to world trade. Yes, we have our own daughter who is heading the place, but that does not mean that we will have it all. You see, my understanding, high school understanding of economics or commerce as a subject, is that balance of trade is the difference between exports and the imports of commodities made to or by a country in a particular year. We have known that there's no proper balance of trade with respect to trading across the globe. African countries are oftentimes subchanged, if you like. So how has this MC12 conference taken care of Africa's position in terms of not being properly capacitated, to produce commodities and goods that they could export as a continent? For instance, of course, we import more than we export, right? So is WTO conference, taking a look at this very critical, situation against the African continent?
Thank you very much, and I also want to join the Honorable Minister to thank the President for providing the political will to us to negotiate very, very well. And the Minister who led the delegation has really done a lot in terms of facilitating the active participation of the Nigerian delegation with a push for our position to be recognized during the ministerial conference. Based on your question, prior to the ministerial conference, here in Geneva, we have what we call African group. And African group will normally come together to discuss on each of the negotiating issues and also taking consideration of our national positions, and we harmonize positions. So that I think we have done, and that has helped the African countries in pushing forward their negotiating positions in the ministerial conference that took place. If you look at the decisions and the declarations that you've mentioned, about 10 of them, in each of these issues clearly reflected the interests of the African countries. Let's take, for instance, the issue of the e-commerce, that is the work program on e-commerce. It's been, for some time, we have been agitating for the reinvigoration of the e-commerce program, which of course the African countries all agreed to push forward on the discussions on the e-commerce work program, the view of the current situation globally. We are in a digital world now, and of course, no country should be left behind. So that has been taken care of. If you look at another issue on fisheries subsidies, the fishery subsidy agreement has been on the table for the past 20 years until now that we have been able to make it possible. The interests of the African countries are reflected, even though we will continue to discuss, because there are still some areas of special and differential treatment which has to do with the de minimis, the transition period, and the nautical miles, which we will continue to discuss on the disciplines. So the other area is the issue of the food security. Globally, in fact, the African countries, due to COVID-19, are largely affected with the negative consequences of the COVID-19. So in that regard, in this decision of the food security, decision, it was largely agreed that necessary actions must be taken to address the insecurity of food in our countries, which of course we are largely affected. So if you also look at the WTO response to pandemic, there are also some basic areas where the interests of Africa are largely captured in the sense of some trade restrictions that can harm some of our food security and many other things, the trade facilitations and the rest. So eventually, I can vividly say that the interests of Africa are captured in all the issues that we negotiated in the ministerial conference. And the outcomes were very positive to us. And of course, it was all jubilating that for the first time, the ministerial conference with our sister in the head of affairs have been able to achieve tremendously in this ministerial conference. About 10 decisions, which for a very long time it has not happened. If you look at the history of all the past ministerial conferences, how many decisions were made in most of them? Some none at all. But this particular one, we got a lot. And of course, where Africa is happy is that all the issues have been captured based on the interest of the African members.
Ambassador Adamu Abu Hamid, thank you very much. Let me still stay with you and get the benefit of your presence in Geneva. You are Nigeria's ambassador to the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. If you went through the literature on international economic law, international economic reforms, and indeed, the comments of some Nigerian players in the economy, the view was always expressed that we somehow walked into the WTO, which took over which was the organization that replaced GATT, that's the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, in 1995, without having a handle on some of the issues, which is why it was said that we're having some challenges with our trade relations and so on and so forth. But the happy comments that I've heard from the Honorable Minister of State, Nigeria's chief trade negotiator, and yourself now in Geneva would seem to suggest that we are engaging a new gear in terms of, one, our understanding of WTO, and secondly, seeking to properly situate Nigeria's interest in WTO. Is that the case?
You are very correct. Let me tell you, before the coming on board of the current administration, which is the Director General of the World Trade Organization, everyone that has been following the happenings in the WTO will definitely confirm to you that things were really not going well because of the fact that there were a lot of mistrust among the members. There were a lot of challenges facing the WTO. In fact, most countries have started losing hope because of the challenges facing the multilateral trading system, particularly the WTO. So with the coming of the DG, current DG, in fact, during the campaign, she already promised members that she was coming as a reformist to ensure that the image and the integrity of the World Trade Organization is restored. And as soon as she took over, she started with that zeal. And she was able to mobilize all the members to come back to the table and to continue the negotiations. With that, Nigeria's image, in view of the fact that she is the leader in the World Trade Organization Secretariat, is really very popular. Now, we that are here representing Nigeria in participating in all the negotiations and with the support of our ministers and stakeholders back home, we are able to liaise with the office of the DG and of course the chairs of all the negotiating groups to push our positions, and our positions are being recognized. So the leadership role played by Nigeria at the moment in the World Trade Organization is really recognized internationally. So we are really making much effort to ensure that more benefit goes to Nigeria. I can even confirm to you that after the visit of the DG, thanks visit to the president at that time by the DG, by the time she returned, we put all the reports together of our coalition of interest from Nigeria, and we started working seriously. I can tell you that a lot of things from that period till now have been realized in terms of the support to the SMEs, in terms of the support to the trade standards development. Also, there are many things that we are working, technical assistance program, and so on. So really, as you said, the interest of Nigeria is really being recognized now in the WTO. And globally, they are appreciating the effort and support of Nigeria in contribution to the development of the multilateral trading system at the moment.
Thank you, Ambassador Demo Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to WTO. Honorable Minister, Nigeria has been engaged in previous WTO meetings, even before it became it metamorphosed into WTO. And the question would have been, Nigeria is said to have no international product. Analysts have examined exports and they realized the fact that apart from food items or commodities, they go to a few countries across the globe because some reject products that are coming from Nigeria and all that. We don't seem to have an international product we can hold on to say, look, we are trading internationally and this is one of our products. All right, and we have also signed certain agreements in the past, and one have wondered whether those agreements have been implemented. If yes, how have those agreements benefited Nigeria, apart from the current one that you have just, has been established, Nigeria being interested in 6 points, which you raised earlier on? Would you say that Nigeria has been religiously implementing agreements by the WTO in the past? What is your view about this, and how do you now intend to ensure that whatever is agreed at that level will be implemented in Nigeria and will be beneficial to our trading system?
Thank you very much. First of all, for me as a minister, I believe in value for money. When we came on board, I discovered we pay contributions to the WTO to the tune of about 530,000 Swiss francs, which is almost equivalent to 530,000 US dollars. So the question is, what are we getting out of the WTO, which was what informed our engagement in terms of preparations, reorganizing the National Office for Trade Negotiations, even upgrading our office in WTO with an ambassador. So having said that, this engagement for us indicates the level of seriousness of the administration, because His Excellency the President has come with an agenda of economic transformation and improving the lives of people. And trade is one of the areas. The main purpose of trade is to improve the lives of the people. When you trade, your economy grows, then you are able to improve the lives of the people. So there are various agreements, as you said, but given the context of WTO prior to the recent arrival of the DG, there's so many agreements, as has been mentioned. You have this agreement on that's been negotiated for 20 years, an agreement on fisheries. 20 years is a lifetime. Ambassadors would have come to Geneva and gone back, and it's not just Nigeria, all the countries. So that sense of urgency. Secondly, you find that if you have agreements that you're not implementing, things like COVID come that nobody planned for, and then it completely upsets the whole system. So if I mention COVID now, you look at, as I said, what happened with the vaccines. By now, we should also be planning. How are we going to start producing these vaccines in the country? Which is why I said in 2 weeks, that committee needs to sit down, because the committee has as members from all aspects of the trade, MDAs and so on and so forth. Then you said something about Nigeria not having a product, an international product. I do not quite agree with that, because one of the areas of thrust for this administration is agriculture. And a lot of products are coming up. We had as a case study or an example of a lady during the MC12 that was showcased. She was showcased amongst 4 other MSMEs that's producing shea butter from Shaki or somewhere in Oyo State with support from the IFC. And she told why she was selected is at a point she was only doing 2,000 tons of shea butter per annum. Now she's doing 40,000 tons and looking for a market where to send these things to. There are so many products that are coming up. These ones, I would say, initiatives of the ministry and also initiatives of the private sector. Our sesame seeds, our cocoa, our palm oil, things are coming up. And we have the commodities associations.
And yes. I'm not cutting you short. I'm just, I want to continue from the I mentioned that we, apart from commodities that we're talking about now,
I get that.
We'll have to talk about international.
No, but
for instance, yes, madam, the phones that we use,
yes,
is an international product.
Yes.
These food items we're talking about, or commodities, not many countries will want to have that. Right, you cannot sell in all countries. But phone, for instance, sells in every country across the globe. That's what I meant by having an international product.
Yeah, but now you have our digital space. You have our young people that have startups in the fintech area, where you have maybe 5 or 6 Nigerian companies that are now unicorns. You know, so you need to look at those areas of services. You need to look at the areas of the creative industries where we're making a lot of strides, you know, be it fashion, be it IT, and so on and so forth. So we have all these emerging products, if I may call them, and these products are doing very well. And even within the business forum of Chogom, we discovered a lot of Nigerians that came to showcase what it is they're doing, what it is that they're selling to the international community.
Honorable Minister, thanks. We'll get a press for time, so I'll reserve one of my questions for you when we go around the other guests. Ambassador Aga, the Chief Trade Negotiator for Nigeria. A lingering concern for observers of Nigeria's economy is how we can continue to avoid being a dumping ground for all kinds of products from all corners of the world. Is this part of what we should expect now as an outcome of these WTO talks and agreements?
Well, thank you. The reality of every country, no 2 economies are the same. Each economy has its peculiarities. The trust of policymakers is to identify what works for you. And what may work for Nigeria may not work for another country. Or what works for other country may not work for Nigeria at all. Sometimes for cultural reasons, for location, and all kinds of things. When you trade, you must not see it as a zero-sum game. Trade is mutually beneficial. So the challenge for Nigeria, which is what I have been pushing for, is not about importing or not importing. It's about what do you import. And you can answer this question by looking at your framework of rules. Very often you hear people talk about free trade, and free trade is harming us. There's nothing like free trade anywhere in the world. It's the rules. And when you look at Nigeria trade rules, the trade sector in Nigeria is the least regulated. So if you don't regulate, you get all kinds of things coming in. If you go to America, which you say is a champion of the market economy, there are certain things you can't even sell. You sell to somebody that the government considers an enemy, is treated as treason, and you go to prison. So what we are trying to do now, based on the trade policy action plan that the government approved in March this year, is to build the basic trade support infrastructure and institutions. Unfortunately, where we are now, sometimes there are misgivings because there are things that others are doing. There are encroachments. But the first thing we are trying to do, which I think we have the draft bills now back from Federal Ministry of Justice, is what you call an investigating authority. All over the world, government protects producers. And government protects producers, allowing them to file complaints, whether it is on the basis of anti-dumping, because a company abroad is underselling in a market to take advantage, or whether it's simply in terms of an import surge, safeguards. So like we are doing AFCFTA. What happens if we liberalize under the AFCFTA and there is a surge in imports? We have a right to protect the economy, but we have to follow certain steps, certain rules. So we need to have a law on safeguards. There could also be a situation where a government is subsidizing a particular sector to enable it sell abroad. We need to have something on subsidies so we can countervail those kinds of imports that we get. So at the end of the day, we need to be clear. Dumping per se is not the dumping that we see in Nigeria. The dumping that we see in Nigeria is criminal, or is a malfeasance, where people are bringing in fake, counterfeited products. That's not for trade. That's for the customs, for SON and the other regulatory authorities to handle. But for trade, you need a platform where the business community will file complaints, you will investigate, you put duties. In doing this, you have to recognize that apart from the producer, you need to protect the consumer.
All right, Ambassador. I'm not questioning you. We're running short of time, right? So I'd like to get to Geneva before we round up.
Let me just round this up.
Just a few seconds.
Just because sometimes when you focus too much on the producer, you harm the consumer. When you harm the consumer, you harm the retailer or those who are in the distributive chain, and you disrupt the economy. One that will higher prices. So these are the kinds of things we need to avoid.
Okay, I think when my colleague talked about dumping, I'm not sure he meant just fake products. There are ones that are not fake products. If you go to Lagos in some area, you see Chinese, trading along the road, selling little cracker or Bendal Select and what have you. Right? You can't do that in China, for instance. So when we talk about these agreements that we reached at the WTO level, in some countries, like Nigeria, for instance, people bring in a lot of things. And one talks about you talked about regulation, which perhaps is lacking, in this direction, and that's the reason why my colleague said dumping, and we see it, in many products, across Nigeria. Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, what is your take on this issue of dumping, in Nigeria? Because I know that in Switzerland, you cannot just sell anything they want to sell. Because, whenever you agree on WTO, if the country says, look, don't import this to our country, it doesn't come in. Even your product's brand, in some cases, like in America, if you don't produce an American specification, they're not going to buy.
For instance, that the US and some of the other bigger economies have wars over steel imports or steel exports.
Exactly. So let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I quite agree with the explanation by Ambassador Aga. Only to add that I think if I can understand what you are talking about the Chinese, in our market, directly selling as items. I think that has to do with what we call distributive trade. And distributive trade has its own policy, which of course will limit the kind of foreign nationals on what they should embark on at the national level. So, and I think that is what need to be addressed. The issue of dumping, as you rightly mentioned, is that when we talk of dumping in trade, we mean that selling something at a lower price compared to what is in the foreign market. So, and of course, that has to be thoroughly investigated to establish that the foreign goods being sold at the national level, the price of it is far less than what is in the foreign market before it is established. And that has its own channel of investigation. There has to be that anti-dumping authority. There has to be complaint, you know, by probably the competitors in the domestic market, that the import surge of social products into the country is affecting theirs, and of course with a kind of complaint with some certain observation, and the authority will have to carry out the investigation of to the foreign market to establish what is the price being produced there, you know, calculating with the transportation and so on, then to be able to establish that dumping established. Now, with the
Ambassador Abdul Hamid, I'm sorry, we have to jump in again one more time because we have less than a minute or round about that to wrap up this program. Honorable Minister of State, you listed in your opinion 6 core areas that the 2022 agreements impact on Nigeria. Tell us something. How will this have policy implications for us? How do we follow through with a critical element in our public policy space, namely implementation?
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, as I mentioned, we're triggering that system that helped us to create or establish Nigeria's position. For example, if you look at the TRIPS waiver on vaccine production, it means immediately our pharmaceutical industry and the Ministry of Health need to trigger a system whereby those 2 ways, those pharmaceutical companies that are interested in going into vaccine production or government established previous vaccine producing institutions could be assisted to quickly take advantage of this waiver. It's a waiver that's in place for some time. It's not a waiver that will be there forever. So we need to trigger that immediately. Secondly, when we look at the issue of the moratorium on e-commerce, it's probably customs to take note that these e-transmissions, there's a moratorium in place. And wherever there is a moratorium or space, breathing space given, countries quickly take advantage of this kind of space. Already, I could give the example of Rwanda that's already putting in place, doing a groundbreaking ceremony for vaccine production. But if you're doing vaccine production, remember you also have to do the campaign on enlightenment on vaccine hesitancy, because you do not want to produce the vaccines and your people are not this thing. And then, of course, in terms of the fish subsidies, agencies like the NIOMA, Institute of Oceanography and Marine Research, which is in Lagos, which has to do with fisheries, needs to key in to see in what areas can they help the country or our fishermen. Yes.
All right, Honorable Minister. Yes. At this point, we'd like to, appreciate your presence here this morning and your contribution to the conversation. All right, Honorable Minister of State, Industry, Trade and Investment, Miriam Katagun. Thank you again for being here. And Ambassador Fred Aga, Nigeria's Chief Negotiator, Trade Negotiator, we thank you for being here. And of course, Ambassador Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's Ambassador to WTO. It's been a pleasure sharing your views on Good Morning Nigeria today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Deep thanks for tuning in. Join us tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kurian Umayo. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you.